Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Noble Company podcast. I am your host, Ro-Ann-Smith. And on this podcast, we discuss contemporary business topics with academics, entrepreneurs, and experts from across the globe. In this episode, we join the World Tourism Organization in their discussion on the theme, Rethinking Tourism. For this very interesting discussion, we have Sheena Davina Layne, and Professor Andrew Spencer. So tourism has a significant role to play in the achievement of the 7 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. However, the COVID-19 pandemic exposed several weaknesses and systemic inequalities that must be addressed in order to achieve these goals. Now, all three of our panelists are from the Caribbean, but this discussion transcends the region and can also spark innovative thought in other industries. So I welcome you to weigh in, send your questions, and let's keep the conversation lively. So I will now introduce my guests. I am going to begin with Sheena. So Sheena is the marketing coordinator at the Tobago Tourism Agency Limited, with over 10 years of experience in the travel and tourism industry, succeeding in diverse roles in hospitality, sales, events, and education. In her thrust to address some of the gaps between academia and the industry, Sheena transitioned from being a lecturer at the Tobago Hospitality and Tourism Institute to the Division of Tourism and Culture, where she was at the forefront of executing all tourism events such as Tobago Jazz Experience and Blue Food Festival, and was a director on the Northeast Protected Area Management Trust, mandated to improve the management of Tobago's Northeast protected areas. Sheena joined the team at TTAL in 2018 and has been an integral part of the growth and establishment of the organization. Her significant influence in the successes of the agency, as well as Tobago, has been felt across the globe, as she leads the team responsible for integrating all the marketing efforts of the agency in Europe, the United Kingdom, North America, and the Caribbean. Sheena has been a key player in the conception of Tobago's award-winning go-to-market strategy and destination marketing campaign, Tobago Beyond, which led TTAL to win the prestigious Silver Award for Best National Tourism Board Campaign at the International Travel and Tourism Awards in 2019. A well-rounded professional with a passionate love for Tobago and an intimate understanding of the product offerings of the destination, Sheena continues to steer the helm of Tobago's marketing team. Her tenacity and expertise have come to the fore to navigate these challenging times to offer the post-COVID-19 consumer in the key market segments compelling propositions to visit Tobago. In her free time, Sheena dedicates her efforts to entrepreneurial advocacy and provides marketing knowledge to elevate small businesses and entrepreneurs in the Tobago space. Sheena also enjoys testing vegan recipes with a Tobagonian twist for friends and family and rediscovering the hidden gems of her island home. Welcome, Sheena.
Hi, thank you. Good night, everyone.
All right. So next we have Davina Layne. Now, with over 18 years of experience in sustainable tourism, training, human resources development, and administration, Davina currently serves as Executive Director of the Intimate Hotels of Barbados. Davina has worked regionally and internationally and also runs a passion project, Your Corporate Image, focused on personal and professional development. And if you haven't heard of Your Corporate Image before, please go and check it out on IG. Lots of useful information. Now, Davina is a certified hospitality trainer and holds a master's degree in tourism, environment, and development from King's College London, a postgraduate diploma in sustainable environmental development with management studies from Kingston University, and a Bachelor of Science in Tourism Management with the University of the West Indies. Her personal passions are travel, women's leadership, fashion, finding and eating good food, training and development, and helping others become their best selves. She's a Toastmaster and a Rotarian with the Rotary Club of Barbados. Welcome, Davina.
Thank you, Roanne. Good evening, everyone.
All right. So last but not least, we have Professor Andrew Spencer. Professor Andrew Spencer is the president of the Caribbean Maritime University. He has served in executive leadership in academia as well as corporate entities in the Caribbean. He was most recently full professor at the Mona School of Business and Management at the University of the West Indies, Mona, where he was also the deputy executive director for all undergraduate programs. He was the first to be promoted to the rank of full professor in the substantive field of tourism at UWI. Professor Spencer served for 4 years as the executive director of the Tourism Product Development Company Limited, the agency responsible for the maintenance, development, and enhancement of the tourism product in Jamaica, and the largest agency in the Ministry of Tourism. He also gave stellar service from 2013 to 2017 as the director of the Center for Hotel and Tourism Management, University of the West Indies, Nassau, Bahamas. He's the holder of a BSc and MSc in Tourism Management from the University of the West Indies and was awarded his PhD in Tourism Strategy from Bournemouth University in the United Kingdom. His research record demonstrates over 50 scholarly publications, including 3 authored books with top international publishers. Professor Spencer has consulted extensively with Caribbean nations on issues related to tourism development. He also chaired and has been a member of 12 public boards in Jamaica. At present, he chairs the Governance Committee of the University Council of Jamaica, the Development Committee at the National Education Trust, the Audit Committee at the Airport Authority of Jamaica, and the University of the Commonwealth Caribbean's Tourism Advisory Board. Professor Spencer is married with 2 children. Welcome, Professor Spencer.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for coming. And one of the things that I need to point out here is that at least 2 of us, I'm not sure about Sheena, but actually 3 of us, Andrew, Davina, and myself, we're all graduates of the Center for Hotel and Tourism Management of the University of the West Indies. So I'm not sure what years Davina went, but Andrew, what year did we go? In 2001?
Yeah, we left in 2003. So yes,
we left university in 2003. Not to age ourselves or anything, but so we are proud graduates of CHTM. And if there's anybody here from CHTM in our audience, please feel free to drop CHTM in the comments so that we know that you're here. And if you're tuning in, you can also let us know where you're tuning in from as well. All right. So I'm really excited to have you guys here, especially because tourism is the first industry that I've ever been involved in. It's where it was actually my first love. And it's an area that I still have some kind of interest in, even though I don't work in that area. Okay, Marcia, Wesley, Tamita, we see you. We see the CHTM peeps. And so it's a pleasure to have this conversation today. And there's a lot of understandings about what tourism is and the role that tourism plays within our island states. And what I'm going to ask you is, what is your definition of tourism? How do you see tourism? Anybody?
Okay, I guess I can go first since everyone else seems so quiet. Well, truthfully, my personal definition really doesn't vary that much from the World Tourism Organization's definition. So really, tourism is around the movement of people and to places or countries that they haven't visited before. And it can be for a variety of reasons as well. So it isn't always pleasure. It can be for business. It can be for sports. So a variety of reasons. What I would add to that is that I do believe that there is also a time limit. So, and I believe that time limit is about 6 months where you would stop calling the person a tourist. And I understand also that that is also why, generally speaking, if you get a visa, it doesn't go for longer than 6 months. If you get a tourist visa or a visitor visa, it doesn't go for longer than 6 months, because after 6 months, you're no longer considered a tourist or a visitor. So that's essentially what tourism is for me, largely around the movement of people. It's quite a large industry, as we all know, and an all-encompassing industry touching airlines, restaurants, hotels, etc. But again, largely around the movement of people experiencing new things, doing new things, traveling for business, pleasure, etc. So that's my take.
Anybody else has anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it was covered very comprehensively, but just from I guess, a local perspective, when we're looking at tourism, if I'm a Tobagonian, I would say definitely that tourism is a temporary expansion of the island's population, because you're basically on the island interacting with all our resources, water, electricity, interacting with our people. So yes, you're here for a temporary period, but sometimes we seem to forget that they're actually utilizing our space, they're utilizing our resources, and they're interacting with our people to have certain experiences, whether it's for business or for leisure.
Andrew, anything? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so for me, I mean, so all of those traditional definitions, yes, but I'm gonna be a little bit provocative. To my mind, tourism is one of the most complex assembling of economic activities one could think of. In fact, post-COVID, or I don't know if we're post-COVID yet, but tourism is probably the activity that has the most blurred lines now, where vacation is work and work is vacation, and people are living nomadic lifestyles. And I'm going to work remotely in Barbados for 12 months, but am I a tourist? So it continues to evolve. And to my mind, tourism is one of those fluid things. I was having a debate with someone recently about whether it's even an industry. If you look at the very classical definitions of the components of an industry, is it an industry? There's a certain minister of tourism in the Caribbean who says it's a series of moving parts. So yes, all of those things said before, but I just wanted to throw a little bit of that color in it.
Okay, fair enough. And are there any misconceptions of tourism that you would have come across as you do your work, as you interact with tourists, as you interact with locals? Any misconceptions?
Well, I think for me, a lot of the stereotypes which are held up about some of our destination spaces, and I think because some countries, I'll use Jamaica as an example, I notice you have beautiful representation of some key destinations on the call. For Jamaica, that has a very distinct country image as opposed to a destination image. There's a little bit of confusion sometimes about what we represent and who we are, and some of the traditional things that they expect to see. You know, people assume everybody in Jamaica smokes weed, or that everyone, you know, walks around in Miami Vice shorts and sandals, and that we're on island time. And so that's kind of what's expected in the experience overall. And sometimes that expectation is not met, and it causes some dissonance. The other thing that I think is a grave misconception about tourism is that we're all games, right? And that we are simply playing while we work. For many people in the industry, it is grueling work. It's tough work. It's sometimes at very low wages. And so I think that that's one of the misconceptions about the fantasy elements of tourism.
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely endorse the first thing that Andrew said. Well, the first mix with the last, because living in the UK, and I lived in the UK, I lived and worked in the UK, and I went back again then for school. And I remember my work colleagues would say to me, "I can't imagine that you work in Barbados. Like, I can't imagine that. I just think that everybody's on the beach for the whole day." And I'm like, "What? Like, are you crazy? Of course we work." Like, what are you going on about? So yes, I definitely can corroborate that with what Andrew said. But interestingly enough, one of the things that I still find interesting, and I use the word interesting purposely because it's one of those words that I like to use when you probably want to shroud your meaning a little bit, but um, people still think tourists have a particular color, or that tourists come from a particular place. And I remember a few years ago when I worked with the Caribbean Tourism Organization, a friend of mine and I, we were actually going to write a book because her little nephew was of that opinion. I mean, granted, he was a child, he was small, but we felt like, you know what, we could write a book for children, to let them know that, tourists are, anybody can be a tourist. You don't have to be a particular race or color. Um, but I find even in 2022, we have adults who do this. And we see it often in service and how service is expressed in our region, unfortunately. You may be at the bar, you may have gotten there before somebody of a particular race, but they may serve that person before you because I don't know. I don't know what's going through their mind, and I'm not going to um, pretend to stab a guess. But there's still that thing of, a tourist might be of a particular color, race, nationality, when we all are and can be tourists, even in your own country.
Correct. Yeah, totally agreed. Yeah, I definitely endorse the sentiments expressed before. I think one of the misconceptions that I come across a lot with tourism is that all the problems with tourism can be solved with marketing and promotions. Just going back to the points raised earlier, it's such a complex system. There's so many moving parts involved in making a tourism destination successful, making a tourism experience worthwhile, and all the players involved in making that happen. There's so many moving parts, and we can talk at length about how these moving parts should actually work together. I think that's one of the misconceptions definitely about tourism, and it doesn't happen overnight. It definitely takes a lot of work and a lot of collaboration to get tourism up and running.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I'm just going to pull up some of the comments. Curtis, Kelly Mitchell, for example. Well, Curtis, I am here because I have a passion for marketing and I believe tourism needs aggressive marketing. Thanks for coming, Curtis.
Which was the point I was just talking about.
Yeah.
When you study marketing, just from a purely academic point of view, the first thing you look at is the products. So we always I would say at a crossroads when we're looking at tourism destination marketing or tourism destination promotions, and creating that perception and following through on that perception that we create for people. Like the example with Jamaica earlier, there's this perception of the island versus what is actually going on. So we always fit into this box. And, how do we get out of that box and create an experience or an impression that works for the residents as well as the visitors? In addition to considering how the product should be at the forefront of that conversation. So yeah, it's marketing, but if we remember just basic 101 marketing, it starts with, what the product is and how you create value for a specific type of client or customer.
Right, and great product sells, right? So, I mean, obviously the packaging and the marketing will matter, but I spent 4 years of my life fighting to make the case that it's product. There are some dangers of an exceptional marketing campaign without solid products. One, obviously, is a dissonance of coming to something that has been promised but can't be delivered. There's
Yeah.
that. And then there's the other side of it, which is the creation of a package and a label and a look and feel in the marketing space, which does not represent anything authentic or organic. Then there's the other side. So you have no identity, right? Then there's
Yeah.
the other side of it, which is that if you're marketing something that's empty,
Mm-hmm.
you're much more likely to have to work harder to keep marketing that empty thing.
Yeah.
Because the experience that has been received is not sufficient to make me come back. So your repeat visitor statistic is going to be low. And then you're going to have to come up with a new set of gimmicks to ensure that you're constantly keeping the flow. So again, I agree. I really agree with my friend that it's product first. I think it starts with product. I think it ends with product. I think marketing is that beautiful layer that you place there to ensure that you are excavating and demonstrating that which is real.
Yeah, it's a pretty packaging. It's a box that you got everything in. So, yeah, we tend to forget that part. And I mean, the pandemic has really shown us how we have to focus on the products and the packaging. Because the world has moved on so much. People are so skeptical now. We live through an era of fake news. People are very skeptical of what they're seeing out there and questioning the authenticity of what they see. So again, it comes back to what we put out there and to what extent it actually represents the experience that a particular traveler can actually have, and how we can sustain that as well.
And we sorry not to lengthen the point, but an important point you made about fake news. The other side of it is also true. That which is true is also easily shared. So there are ways to verify very quickly if you're telling the truth.
Yeah, it is.
We don't control the flow of information anymore.
Yeah. And I mean, being locked up for almost 2 years, it's so easy for people to find the truth behind what we're selling. That Fire Festival case study is one that we refer to a lot. Created so many impressions.
My goodness. Yes. Well, that's a disaster.
It was, and I mean, there's so many others that came out after that, and even the advertising regulations you're seeing in certain parts of the world that influencers can't use filters anymore. So in terms of how we represent a product and how it affects the promotion of that product, it definitely is evolving, and it's making us see that we need to be more true to what we have.
All right, I want to pull up Kelly Mitchell's comment. He says, tourism is understanding, developing, and monetizing the cultural experiences of the destination. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, well, that's what we've been saying all along, right? The best way to have a sustainable, authentic, competitive product is to showcase and to develop and to ensure that you're curating that which is really you, right? And that comes back to the cultural argument we've been making for years. So, I mean, I support the argument. I just think we have to be careful with how we commodify. I think we have to be careful with how we engage in stage authenticity, that snapshot, which really shows one version of something that may not necessarily represent what the whole wants to represent. But in the main, I think that's the way to go. I mean, I used to say that true culture is completely inimitable until I saw some places do Bob Marley better than Jamaica, right?
Hilarious.
That's where a lot of the competitive advantage is.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just, reflecting on this whole concept of culture because it's such a subjective area. in terms of how, I guess, residents perceive culture versus visitors perceive culture. And that's just the point he was making in terms of, somebody can replicate a Bob Marley experience or Bob Marley presentation better than, what they do in Jamaica. So it's one of those things that you definitely have to, I guess, balance the expectations and ensure that, you don't lose the authenticity of what the actual cultural experience is trying to I guess create or represent in this, just in monetizing, just for monetizing sake. Acculturation is such a huge discussion in tourism. You see it all over the world, in Africa, in India, in the Caribbean. So I think that's a great topic. But at what point do you stop? At what point do you say, let me stay true to this particular art form in its purest form, versus creating something that is a representation of what it can give to me. Just thoughts to consider, because I mean, there are different, I guess, types of tourists, and even within the types of tourists, if you're a cultural enthusiast, you can be an extreme versus a passive. So who do you really want to target, and who do you want to, I guess, get that experience to, and who gives you the best return on investment? Because sometimes it's a numbers game, and you sell yourself short, and you just kind of compromise what the island or the country has to offer.
I would add to that, picking up from what you said just now and earlier, Sheena, about tourism not only being about the persons coming into our countries, but recognizing that, we have local stakeholders that we also have to look after. And when we look at our environment, for example, and the impact that tourism has on the environment, on the physical environment. So those are things that we need to consider and to manage, things like beach erosion or, noise pollution, air pollution, all of those things we have to consider inconvenience of even locals, trying to get into stores, trying to buy items. And like we would have spoken about earlier, there's sometimes where people look at tourists as the priority customer because they have the money to spend, and we associate sometimes even color or race with a particular, type of income bracket. And so therefore it can be an inconvenience. So we can't just look at it from the perspective of what we are trying to show people that we have to offer, but we also have to consider protecting our own spaces as well. And there's this particular country that comes to mind. I can't remember the name of it, but actually during a particular time of year, they don't have any tourists there at all because they're required to let the beaches or the island kind of rest or restore itself. So that's one thing. Another thing, Jermaine made a very interesting comment. The modern day tourism industry can be in part viewed as a replacement to a system of colonial domination and slavery. I would really love to hear your thoughts on this. I remember, Andrew, I don't know if you remember, once we had a discussion at school about tourism being, whether it is service or servitude. Do you remember that? I think it was Mr. Ulrich. Pardon?
Yeah. I remember nothing from 2002, but
oh my gosh, Andrew. Fair enough. Okay, so anybody has any thoughts on what Jermaine said?
Yeah, well, look, so I think that, and that's why there's some work coming out now on how we, the decolonialism of service and tourism, right? There's so much to unpack with that. It's one of those discussions that I engage in because I know that there are many who are affected by a perception surrounding what they do. My view is, if you look at the Plantation Society. I did a presentation which looked at the Plantation Society and how that relates to plutocracy now, which is really this control of one group of individuals over the economic space. And that there are so many similarities with what these owners looked like then, what the owners look like now, how they manage their capital and their resources then, and how they manage their capital and resources now. And in the main, what we're seeing is that there are many who are exploited by this very lovely industry. I mean, we love it, but there's a lot of exploitation that takes place that could be tantamount or could resemble a lot of what we would see as, you know, resemblances of a plantocratic society. But I wanted to make another point, though, which is the balance to that argument, that there are many who have done exceptionally well, who would have normally been a part of that group of slaves who this dispensation have managed to make their way. The playing field has not been absolutely fair for them to do it, but they've gone against the odds and they've made their way and they're making impact, and they're powerful people, trailblazers who have set a standard. But that's kind of how I like to balance that argument. In the main, though, the system is set up to subjugate in some ways those who are unable to fend for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else to add, Sheena or Davina?
Well, I mean, I would look at it from just in terms of the business model of how tourism is structured, I guess, for the Caribbean. When you look at those who control the majority of resources, or I guess supplying the demand, it can come across like that, but I will endorse the sentiments expressed earlier in terms of the opportunities it has also created for the Caribbean, and moving away from that thinking of, I guess, pushing the narrative of post-colonialism, because we have so many movements now. I definitely think the pandemic has opened up Caribbean people, colored people, in terms of the opportunities that are out there for them and how they can network and leverage and even learn from certain business models, and how we can get to a certain point of monetizing that for ourselves without depending on the colonial powers. But sometimes it's just, I guess, the stage of business you're at. Tobago is very young, I would say, in certain aspects of tourism development. And we will be disadvantaged in some instances against certain players. When you look at the movement of especially large groups of people, they're just certain tour operators, airlines, etc. They sort of command the lion's share of how the industry works. And sometimes you just need to work with that for a while until you can figure out your space and how you navigate your business to be able to create an experience that is reflective of the people and the residents of the island. So again, it just kind of goes back to the tourism life cycle. As you grow, you learn and you rejuvenate, and you kind of come up with a new product, a new perspective, and a new approach to tourism development.
I just wanted to endorse the latter part of what Professor Spencer said, and say that in Barbados, so I work with the Intimate Hotels of Barbados, and the Intimate Hotels of Barbados represent small, locally owned hotels. We have 41 members currently. And if you look at the landscape of Barbados, so if we think of the population of Barbados, there is a majority race, and then there are minorities. So when we think of small, locally owned hotels in Barbados, we can based on how the population structure is set up, that's pretty much what happens within our association as well. And I know there is a perception out there that there is lots owned by a few of a particular race, and I think the association that I work with just debunks that myth. So as Andrew said, it has provided opportunities for people who, generally speaking, would not have had the opportunities to own and manage and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, thank you very much. Curtis, if you'll just pull up just some of the comments, letting people know where our audience is tuning in from. All right, so while Curtis is working on that, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll ask my next question. So, in his official message for World Tourism Day, the Secretary General of the World Tourism Organization stated, "As the world opens up again, we must learn the lessons of the pandemic and the associated pause in international travel. In exposing weaknesses, the crisis showed us where we can build more resilience. And in exposing inequalities, it also showed us where we can deliver more fairness." So what I want to do is talk a little bit about some of those inequalities and some of those weaknesses. So let's talk about the weaknesses first. So what are some of the weaknesses that the pandemic exposed? I'll start with you, Andrew.
Well, I think the pandemic, with exception to the loss of life and illness and so on, gave us some opportunities to reflect on some things that we've tried to ignore for a very long time. So the fact that we've been saying for years, high end over high impact, yeah, the fact that we've been saying smaller groups as opposed to larger groups, the fact that we've been saying teach people how to be relative in how they treat with people's personal space, right? The fact that we've been saying that we must develop a model that is centered around our people, it must be for our people, it must uplift our people, and people must have dignity in their workspaces. The fact that we've said, be mindful of the models of tourism that you develop in some spaces, but we've ignored it. I think what we got the opportunity to do, and of course, it revealed the weaknesses in our health systems too, right? The support things that are supposed to be at the behest of our tourism industry, those things were revealed. And I think what we have been brought back to the table to say is, the same community tourism we talked about, it's not new, but it's certainly going to now have to be at the heart and soul of what we do. The same kinds of discussions we had about understanding your market, right? Um, we keep going back in circles, and I have been a little disappointed that with the opening up of our borders and economies, that many of us are running full speed back in the direction where we were 2019. It's almost like we want to reclaim some 2019 glory, and it concerns me. And so there are many other weaknesses, but I'll leave Sheena and Davina to tell you some more.
Sheena, any thoughts?
I mean, yeah, Andrew covered quite a lot. But what I would say is one of the weaknesses, sometimes we tend to fall into a routine. I think that's what he was alluding to as well. And the pandemic definitely highlighted the way in which we think and how we approach our business models and how we engage with people. If I just look at it from a marketing point of view, there's always this dissonance between the message that you create for the external audience, meaning the visitors, versus what the residents believe should be said. And obviously, there's consultation, there's over consultation. Everybody wants to have a say. You can't please everyone. But I definitely think the pandemic highlighted the weaknesses and some of the approaches that were taken and how we can revisit some of the engagement opportunities that we have with stakeholders. And just going back to the community tourism point, there was a lot of, I guess, fight or pushback on community tourism the whole concept of collaborating to compete. You have to work together and all of that. But, in a crisis, you're forced to rethink how you work together. So those weaknesses we had where we were lobbying for collaboration, lobbying for support in certain areas, while it was a weakness that definitely reared its ugly head in the early stages of the pandemic, coming down to the end, there was a lot of collaboration and support because in Tobago, all borders basically reopened in January. Our first international flight was in January. Our beaches were closed until April, like they were fully reopened in April. So, living through that sort of experience when you're seeing your neighboring islands being open, it can definitely make you pause and rethink what you may have, I guess, pushed back or not supported before. So yes, it highlighted weaknesses, but I think from my perspective, it highlighted a lot more opportunities for us in Tobago because we had a hard time for a very long time.
Yeah.
And for me,
Davina?
yeah, for me, I'll mention two. So the first one, I remember when I did my master's thesis, I did it on resilience. And I think for me, the pandemic highlighted that we really haven't done a lot in terms of ensuring that we are in a position to bounce back from these types of external shocks very well. Um, that's what my thesis was about, being able, resilience through external shocks, all the shocks that happens. I mean, tourism is a very volatile sector. I'm not going to use the word industry, Andrew. And I actually have my qualms with that word as well. I generally don't say tourism industry. But yeah, so tourism is volatile, lots of crises, financial crises, health crises, everything. But when we, get affected by these, get impacted by these, how are we really, set up to continue? So, it's basically like business continuity planning. Do we have anything in place? So that's one thing the pandemic highlighted to me, that really and truly we don't. Nothing has a lot hasn't really been done in that space. And the second thing, and Roanne, for me, it's the people. So the pandemic also highlighted for me that in many instances we were not treating our people right. And a lot of them realized, and a lot of them, and have not returned to work in the tourism sector once things have opened up, and the hotels and restaurants and wherever we're ready, to go full swing again. So that is something that I'll talk a bit about. Hopefully, I get to talk about it a bit more as we go on. But I think we really need to look at the people-centered aspect of tourism. And when I say people-centered aspect, I'm not only speaking about the person working within the sector, who is extremely critical, but the other people involved would be the communities that in the nation that are affected or impacted by tourism, and our guests as well. So they're people too, right? So how do we serve these three sets of people well, right? And I think that's something that we have fallen short on. But when I mentioned the people not returning, I did mean employees at that time. So that's something that we really need to look at.
Ron, if I may. So,
Sure.
so Davina just took me to a place where I couldn't help but say this. I think what the biggest structural weakness I've seen in a number of our Caribbean islands is that we have embarked on creating a tourism space versus a local space. And I think that became really obvious. So in Jamaica, we talk all the time about, oh, don't worry, crimes against tourists are less than 1%, but we're killing each other. We're saying, oh, don't worry, the transportation system for the tourists is fine. And I'm saying, hold on. The first thing we should be doing is ensuring that our residential spaces are excellent enough quality that we want to invite people to our tours. So let's start there. So take care of everyone, make sure they're safe, make sure they're fed, make sure they have dignity in their surroundings. And then you invite people to your shores to partake responsibly. I think what we have done is to ignore the most vulnerable in our societies while trying to create this superstructure elsewhere. And so, and the biggest example of this for me is always where there's a major festival. And you see everything that's happening to make the festival look good and the surrounding areas and beautification. And I'm like, why didn't the place look good all along?
Yes.
You know, so I think that these are the things that have been properly exposed. I go back to the health system. We don't have good health system for our people, for our own people. So then we couldn't be inviting people to our shores in a time of a pandemic. So these are the things that if we understand that tourism doesn't exist in isolation, it doesn't exist on its own. It can't fix all the problems of any society. It can do its part, but tourism has to be a part of a broader ecosystem where the overall society is taken care of. And then you come enjoy what we already have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd just like to jump in and say one thing. That just
Sure.
spoke to me so much because I remember, I mean, like I said, Tobago was closed for such a long time. And, everyone was talking about the economic losses. A lot of people closed their businesses and they haven't reopened. But the thinking behind it is that they're trying to protect us and not open us up to more risks because our systems cannot handle the onslaught of that temporary residents I was talking about. Because that's what it is. You're bringing these temporary residents into your country, but can you actually deal with the needs of those temporary residents if you can actually deal with the needs of the residents themselves? And I think in hindsight, we may appreciate it, but during the process, we definitely did not because, I mean, the loss of life, the loss of business, and all of that, and our healthcare system, it's not the worst, but it's also not the best. And I can definitely say there were some instances where, there was a decline and we were managing and there were a lot of support. There was a lot of support from the government, but that could not be sustained. And that's at the point where they said, you know what, we need to reopen. And we have a lot of revenge parties and everything right now. But definitely, so, do you put people before profits? And that's one of the things that came out very strong during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just wanted to add to what Andrew was talking about as it relates to transportation in Jamaica and the transportation for the tourists. When I visited Jamaica and I caught the bus, it was hilarious. So I guess I wasn't staying in the tourist area. I was staying in Kingston. And so I got home to one of those buses and it would be what we would call here like a minibus. I'm not sure what they called it in Jamaica, but it was not public transportation. Well, it was not government transportation. And the bus was overloaded, as is in Barbados. And the guy drove for several meters on the sidewalk because the traffic was too much. Yeah. So I was like, okay, like I can't deal with, this long line of traffic. So he got onto the sidewalk and he drove like straight along the sidewalk. So the concern is not for persons necessarily that are, well, it's not for all tourists either. It's for tourists that stay in a particular type of location. Maybe Montego Bay or maybe or Ocho Rios or one of the more popular tourist destinations, or the transportation for that are specifically designated for tourists. I just wanted to put that out there as well.
That's what it is. It's non-tourist transport versus tourist transport.
Yes.
I think where the Caribbean needs to get to is, I mean, everybody in some spaces travel on the same subway, travel on the same train, travel on the same. A unified system speaks to the quality of your system, right? And so it's not even about the area, Rowan. It just had to do with whether your trip was pre-planned or not. If you're just on the street, wherever you are, Montego Bay, Ocho, it's the same thing. You would have a tour planned, so you'd have excellent luxury transportation.
Okay. Yeah. All right,
and just quickly adding on to that, because you're talking about tourist transport and tourist this. And I think sometimes that's one of the reasons why our locals don't really go out and experience things. So this is one of the things we were having a conversation about recently. What is a tourist attraction? It is an attraction. We can all go and experience it. We have so many people in Barbados, for example, who've never visited a multitude of places, because you hear this thing drilling in your head, a tourist attraction. It's a tourist attraction. You already have whatever preconceived notion you have of what a tourist looks like, and that notion does not include you. So therefore, you were not going to the tourist attraction. But no, it's an attraction. It's here for all of us. And I think that's the messaging that we really need to get to, because, you know, this unification that Andrew is talking about. Because guess what? Guess who we needed when nobody could come into our country,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Who did we need to go and visit and eat and everything else, right? So we really need to look at how we are speaking about these things, because you know, when people take it in and mull it over, they may have a completely different perception than what we intend. So
that makes sense, Davina.
Yep.
All right. So my next question is for Andrew. So I know that your recent research has looked at tourism in the post-pandemic context. And what are some of the ways that you think we should be rethinking tourism given everything that's happened?
Okay, so I think a number of things have happened. I started the earlier discussion by saying that we are, the lines have become blurred, and we are now in a space where we're understanding that it is actually okay for an individual to be in a space for an extended period, longer than the 6 months, Davina, longer than the year that we used to say. And in doing all of that, we have now had to reposition ourselves. So I'll give you one example of agility. When I was the CEO of the Tourism Product Development Company, we had responsibility for the entire island, right? One of the things that we did very quickly, because we realized that we could not handle, and unlike Sheena, we opened up like in 2 months. Jamaica closed for like 2 months. I kid you not.
I remember.
We were like, listen, there was this unfair debate about lives versus livelihoods, you know, and it was, we're pitting each other against each other. So we just opened up. We're like, okay, people are going to get sick, but let's open. And that's really what happened. So tourism had to kind of pivot. And what we came up with very quickly was what we call resilient corridors. Now, it's a smart marketing gimmick, because what it really said was, within this space, we are able to take care of you. And so as a temporary measure, the space worked, you know, because when you looked at the positivity rates in the corridor, it was like 1%, and the positivity rate, national positivity rate, was anywhere between 20 and 30%, right? Okay. So I mean, after we made it through by doing that, I started asking the question. I said, so why can't the whole country be one big resilient corridor? What is it that we have in that space that could not have been over time developed in our other spaces? So I think what we really learned from all of this was that we have not paid attention to the things that are really important. I go back to what Davina said. We haven't really taken care of people. If a pandemic comes and you have to be giving out a weekly grant to people, it tells you something about how you've been developing those people, right? If you're in a space where you have to be engaging in activities just to ensure that businesses keep their doors open, and you're flooding them with money, and it means we haven't planned this thing properly. And Davina made a point earlier about resilience. So resilience is not that I think can happen to you. Resilience is about how well you're able to adapt, retool, and move forward, right? We don't have anything built into our systems that can help us to rebound in any reasonable way without having to create some short-term fixes. And I think that the big takeaway for me is let's build this thing from the ground up. I think I use this example too often. Singapore, Singapore, Singapore. Somebody needs to be able to take a political hit, make some unpopular decisions, and get this thing right. Or we're going to be going in a circle. And in 20 years, when, Rowan and I are gray, we're going to come back on this call and we're going to talk about the same issues because we have not fixed them.
Mm-hmm. All right, and on the topic of people, which is your passion, Davina, you talked about persons leaving the industry. Well, actually being forced out of the industry because of lack of jobs, and in Barbados in particular, there was actually a shortage of persons returning to the industry. And you said that that's something that you wanted to possibly talk about a little bit more. So tell me, from a human resources perspective, how do you think that we need to rethink tourism?
So that's a really good question. And I'm going to come at it a bit differently. So for me, I think we need to focus on our leadership, right? I am of the John Maxwell school that speaks to the fact that everything rises and falls on leadership. And I really believe that many of our leaders, unfortunately, they feel like and when I speak, I'm not speaking nationally, I think I'm speaking regionally, right? A lot of our leaders tend to kind of feel like they've arrived. You've reached the pinnacle of your career as a CEO, or maybe a minister, or whatever, a PS, whatever the high echelons, is in this sector. And you think that that's it, but how are you working on yourself to ensure that you're the best for others? And I would really like us to focus on our leadership excellence, training. A lot of leaders believe that they don't need to go back to learn anything, and I think it is a complete fallacy. And I think a lot of, for me in life, I always say, for me, the small things is be the big things, right? So I want to see our leadership, for example, be more inclusive. We tend to listen a lot to the loudest voices, and oftentimes the loudest voices may may not be the majority, they might just be loud. And we're not looking to understand what the group thinks when we exclude the quiet people. And there's a reason why people are quiet. Oftentimes they're disengaged, right? And these are the same people that we need to help us meet our goals, whatever goals those are, right? So let's engage the quiet ones. Let's be inclusive. Let's foster diversity of thought. you know we come from a school, unfortunately, where people think that if you don't think like me, I vex with you, and all these strange things. But guess what? If everybody is thinking the same, somebody isn't thinking. Seriously, because we can't all think the same. Then that's not critical thinking. If everybody just thinks the same way about every single thing, but we don't like diversity of thought. If you come up with an idea and I say, well, actually, maybe you can do this to better it or whatever, then it's a problem. We don't like you. You're problematic. You're always shooting down everything we say. It's different. A difference of opinion is not a threat. Okay. A difference of opinion is an opportunity to learn. Right. And so I think it's really education if we have diversity of thought, because guess what? We're all working towards a common goal. And one of the last things I'm going to mention here that I really feel like we need, and this is probably the first thing, is emotional intelligence. And I speak about this quite a bit on platforms, or I train on it. But at the end of the day, this, I think, really would be very helpful for leadership, because when you are emotionally intelligent, people are not going to run away from you. People are not going to say, well, you're a toxic boss and I don't want to go back there to work, right? So learning how you can deal with your emotional intelligence, which encompasses self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management. So dealing with how you deal with your emotions, how you are thoughtful about how you are impacting other people, I think really would help you to lead very well. So that's the kind of rethinking that I would really like to see our tourism leaders get involved in. You know, everything cannot be about marketing and the product and all these things when the people that you have to carry with you are so underwhelmed and underserved and everything else because of poor leadership.
What I would add here, interestingly enough, is I mean, as a marketer myself, when I look at marketing, I look at marketing from a very holistic perspective, which includes product and which also includes people and includes promotion. So it's all a part of a, you know, one large package. We cannot market tourism without having a well-established representative product to promote, and we need to promote it in efficient ways, cost-effective ways, ways that represent who we are as a culture or expectations. But then also we need to train persons who will be delivering the product or delivering the service, and that involves educating the customer, but also educating the the service providers, so that they know what the standards are for service delivery, so that they know how to recover when there's service failures, so that they know how to treat the customer. So all of that, from a marketing perspective, all of that is a part of marketing, marketing tourism.
Yeah, and as we rethink, the one departure I would have from Davina is that when well, Jamaica has 42% of everyone who comes to Jamaica comes back again. You know why they come back? The people.
Mhm.
The people
Yeah.
are the product. I mean, so I cannot divorce that. I think the people are the center of our product. Everything
Yes.
else is peripheral, and it's there to augment who we are, because the who we are comes from the people. And so I go back. I fully agree with everything you said before, because
Mm.
we're not big on servant leadership. Naturally, leadership is a trophy that we have attained, and we must hold it and look at it and be very proud and forget everyone else around us while we pat ourselves on the back. And I fully endorse what you said earlier, that that we have
Mm.
to transform the thinking, we have to transform the way we do things.
Mhm. Um, just so our audience know, we see your questions. We're going to get to your questions in a bit. So I haven't forgotten you. So please stick around so that we can address some of them. We may not be able to get to all of them, but there are quite a few interesting ones that I really do want to touch on. I'll go to Sheena now. Sheena, you're in destination marketing. How has a pandemic changed the way that you think about tourism?
I mean, it's same sentiments, people at the forefront. I would just say from, again, the messaging, in service marketing, you have an internal and external messaging, or an internal marketing and the external marketing, and how you deliver on that promise really is the internal people fulfilling that promise that you're trying to sell or to communicate. So, during the pandemic, it just reinforced the need for us to have that one voice, be on the same hymn sheets, and really to be able to look at things from the people's perspective. If I just use one example, Davina was talking about training. Uh, in tourism, there's a multitude of training opportunities. And in the pandemic, we were inundated with all the training, online training, this training, that training. But at one point, I just stopped and I was like, is this actually working? Is this actually getting through to people? Because we just take this cookie cutter approach and we don't think about the audience or the people we're aiming to serve. So how is it, we go about enhancing the tourism product through the people and the systems and the programs that we create? We really have to look at it from the user experience. And I'm not talking about the user, meaning the visitor, the people that we're working with. I was actually surprised that no one mentioned digitalization, because that's one of the things that came up a lot during the pandemic. I'm happy that we didn't touch on it, but that's one of those areas that can get very it's one of those areas I'm very passionate about, because I feel that people take a very simplistic approach to it. It's not a situation where everyone is at the same learning curve. We just need to be more considerate of the cohorts and the different cohorts and their needs. When you look at people, age groups, their backgrounds, we need to be able to create systems and trainings and opportunities that align with their knowledge base at that point in time. So I think that's one of the areas, because in marketing, we always look at, how we enable the partners to deliver on a certain experience as well, how they're part and parcel of the messaging, but it's not resonating. And sometimes you have to look and say, why isn't that resonating? Why is it not sticking? Why are they joining the conversation? And again, it just has to do with how we enable them and how we engage them to be part and parcel of that messaging and that engagement. That's a key part for key learning for me, in terms of destination marketing, because I'm just not looking at the pretty things at the ads, because it really comes down to the people delivering on that promise and how they're able to do it.
I think there's a lot of lip service when it comes to engaging the stakeholders, because a lot of times we have these town hall meetings and people are invited to have conversations around certain topics. But at the end of the day, a lot of times government or, the decision makers already know what they're going to do. So really, the persons on the ground, they actually don't get to make a valuable contribution to the tourism product. It's something that's handed to them as opposed to something that they're engaged in. So when we look at engaging these stakeholders, I think we need to also talk about where we engage them. Do we engage them at the very beginning where we're having conversations about the product and the product development, or do we engage them when we're telling them, okay, this is what we are looking to do, and so this is how we want you to get involved? I think that's really important to differentiate as well.
Well, in addition to that, sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just the resources as well. Again, it just kind of goes back to how you enable them. I've started quite a few discussions with stakeholders, not just in Tobago but in Barbados. I've done a few projects with persons in Jamaica, and we have the discussions, we have the engagement, but the follow up. How do we segment the information for consumption after that? And I just have to go back to the pandemic, because we had so much information available at our footprint, at our fingerprints, with understanding the target market, understanding how to engage them online. All these resources were at our fingertips, but to what extent it created the change that we envisioned. And it really comes back to, how do we create that system or those programs in a way that works for these stakeholders in terms of their level of understanding or level of thinking from their perspective, from their user experience perspective. Because when you're developing a website, if anyone has done it, you look at how the navigation of the website is. You want to make sure the words look a certain way. So we put all this thought and effort into developing these things. But when it comes to face-to-face interaction, how am I developing, or how am I creating these programs and these engagements that can really work for these stakeholders at their points of understanding?
Yeah, I was gonna make a point about people again, right? But we focus on a different set of people. So we have our leaders. We speak about CEOs and speak about others. Let's not forget that in the Anthropocene world, capitalism is dominant, right? So A lot of the stakeholder consultations we engage in are intended to check the boxes. We're
Sorry,
intended
Andrew, I missed that. You said lots of the stakeholder.
engagements that we participate in.
Mm-hmm.
It's simply check the box, right? We just want to
Yes.
say, we already there's usually a force at play that has already decided where we're all going. And so we do have that challenge, but it's important to keep having the discourse in the way that we are, because the day we stop engaging in this way is the day we've lost the war altogether. We're going to lose a few more battles, but there's going to come a time when this will reverberate and resonate in all the right places. But there are powers at play. Let's never forget that have their own interests. They have vested interest in ensuring that a particular project happens in a certain location, regardless of what the residents feel. And if we're having real talk today, we have to acknowledge that as a part of the puzzle that we're trying to put together, you know?
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. And I think what you just said, Andrew, and what you also discussed, Sheena, kind of brings us to our next point about inequality, because there is inequality as it relates to the contribution of all stakeholders into the development and the marketing of the the promotion rather of the tourism product. But what are some of the other inequalities that have been exposed? I know one of the things that the Secretary General of WTO mentioned was the fact that less developed countries did not have access to vaccines. So, well, especially in the beginning. So while others were able to travel, persons from more developed countries were able to travel, there were vaccine mandates that prevented certain people from traveling. And so that in itself showed up some of the inequalities in the system. And we saw some countries, which will remain unnamed by me, who were hoarding vaccines. So what we have is persons who are from lesser developed countries who may need to travel for whatever reason, who did not have access to the means to be able to do that. What are some of the other inequalities that you guys have observed as a result of the pandemic? Okay. All
This one's
right.
for all
So,
of us, right?
yeah, this is for anybody. Sorry.
Okay. So similar to what I mentioned earlier in relation to the people, you know. So yes, we have people who are employed with us, but what sort of stake, do they have within the sector? I think that kind of brings a level of inequality just from the perspective of investment. And when I say that, I'm not only necessarily speaking about financial investment, even though yes, that would be a part of it. But do we have is the onus on us to help the persons that we work with or that we are employed with to have more of an invested stake in the sector? Many of us who are leaders or owners of businesses or whatever, we do because we have a lot on the line, and it's usually financial. But what role do we have to play? And I don't know if I'm answering a question with a question, because I think I'm thinking it through as I speak. But what role do we also have to play to kind of break that inequality? Do we have a role to play in assisting them in, becoming a little bit more equitable in terms of the investment that they have in the industry? Because I think with that, comes a different approach to how you work. You know, it really brings about a whole different approach in terms of how you work. So I think that is something that we could probably think about.
I think that's an excellent point. If persons do not feel rewarded by the industry, and we would have seen, like we talked about earlier, with persons being laid off, working 3 days a week or 2 days a week. And so, what people would have seen is that the industry is one, fickle, but also two, does not have significant benefits for them. And it's something that you hear people talking about over and over again, even outside of the pandemic. Persons do not feel, it's not a very well rewarded industry. Persons are not paid very well in the industry. And so there's no motivation, so to speak, to do more. And I think that if some of those inequalities, if some of those inequality gaps are closed, where persons are more respected, persons, like you said, have a bigger stake, persons believe that when I go to do this job, I can actually maintain a sustainable livelihood, then tourism becomes more of a sector that persons are interested in working in. And one of the things that I would have done in my research for this is seeing that tourism really has a big role to play in reducing inequalities, period, because it's a means for poverty reduction, because persons can be paid who work directly in the industry. It opens up opportunities for persons who work in agriculture, for example, to be able to produce food for the industry. There is quality education as it relates to educating people for the industry, or taking the investments, taking the funds from derived from the tourism sector and reinvesting that into quality education. And so there's so many ways that tourism can reduce inequalities. And yes, what you mentioned just now was one of the ways that the inequalities manifest itself in things like persons not feeling like they have a stake as it relates to compensation, etc. I'm not sure if anybody else has anything to add to that. Okay. All right. So what kind of, well, actually, Andrew is no longer here. So, no, he dropped off for some reason. So I'll just move on to the next question. Sheena, you work and intersect with stakeholders and international partners every day. Based on the relationships you develop with them, you have keen insight into their needs. What are some of the disparities you have noticed between the consumer demands and expectations and the offerings on the island?
Well, this is just going back to what we discussed earlier about the products and the packaging, and how the pandemic highlighted the need for products and proper packaging to be at the forefront of the experience. Because during the pandemic in Tobago, we don't have the typical all-inclusive models like Jamaica, so we can create a safe corridor. Because you have to go out and interact and engage with the island to have the real experience of Tobago. So yeah, definitely it would be that the packaging and the experiences, how we create them in Tobago, would be something that we have to relook, and how we promote them to our various partners. And I mean, it's there. And as I mentioned earlier, we were talking about community tourism. All of this we know already. It's just the pandemic brought it to the forefront, and how we collaborate to compete. Because you can't do it by yourself, because there's so many moving parts in the value chain of tourism. So really and truly, if it is your hotelier, if someone goes to a restaurant or go to a water sports provider outside of your space, their experience there also influences their overall experience of the destination. And as a partner, you need to be able to look out for that type of experience. So collaborating and making sure that the experience is seamless and is of a certain quality is definitely something that came to the forefront, not just for Tobago, but generally throughout the tourism industry. During the pandemic, Tobago's beaches were closed. And despite the fact that we had a few trickles of international tourists coming through Trinidad, we had to reimagine what an experience can be like without a beach. Because, when you think of Caribbean, you think sun, sea, and sand.
Yes.
But then again, as I mentioned earlier, it created opportunities. So you saw all these bespoke experiences coming up, the sip and paints and the dance classes and the cooking classes and all of those experiences that people can have outside of a beach experience that we have been lobbying for, that people are craving, because experiential tourism is where it's at. People want to have those immersive experiences. And I know, Davina, as a hotelier, you will know about this. So yeah, it's all about creating those linkages, creating those opportunities among the partners, and how they create those packages that are seamless for someone to consume. And it's easier said than done, to be quite honest. And just going back to the points I made earlier, we assume that stakeholders know how to do this. We assume that people know how to do this, but it's really and truly how we guide them to that point of creating those experiences and creating those packages, because it's definitely not a one size fits all. There is a certain level of hand holding that needs to happen for them to meet the expectations and requirements of various sorts. So Germans will have a certain expectation, the British travelers will have a certain expectations, the Americans will have a certain expectations, and then you have all the policies and rules that come along with working with a tour operator. So there's so many moving parts. But what the pandemic definitely showed us is that it has removed some of the communication barriers. So now it's a lot easier for smaller properties, smaller tourism providers to be able to connect with those people who curate and sell the experiences in our source markets. So while on one hand we're limited in certain areas in terms of packaging, we definitely have the opportunity to delve and get into the opportunities of how we can do it together, and not just for Tobago regionally. Because during the pandemic, there was a lot of interest in regional travel. People wanted to stay in multiple islands. So how do we create that experience, that island hopping experience, for people coming from a large continent, because they assume the Caribbean is, you can hop from one island to the other very easily. So yeah, it's definitely one of the areas I would say from the supply side, how we package our products, and then obviously the demand is looking for a certain presentation of that product. What I will add in there too is our stories or storytelling. I know Davina spoke a lot about people. What I would definitely say came to the forefront is how we manage the storylines for the Caribbean. I think we definitely do not have enough residents of the Caribbean talking about our Caribbean experiences. Like Davina was saying, people think of a tourist attraction for a certain type of person of a certain color. But, during the pandemic, when everyone was home, we had cabin fever, we're looking for things to do. I felt that it was the start of something great for the Caribbean in terms of how we, as Caribbean residents, can tell our story and tell what experiences can be had as a Caribbean person. Um, so it's definitely an experience for us. And that's what visitors also want to see. They want to see a certain level of authenticity. They want to see a local perspective. They want to be able to see that the residents have a certain, say and a certain view of what can be experienced on the island. So from our storytelling and our narrative, so there's a lot of opportunity for content creators and influencers in the Caribbean space, and how we create that content, because we tend to focus on the lifestyle and fashion. But what about those experiences that connect us as a people? We're definitely lacking in that area. And there's a great opportunity for that because that's what people want to see. They want to be able to see what it's like to be in this space as a temporary resident and what experiences I will have as a temporary resident. Um, so those two major things, the packaging and obviously the storytelling and the perspective of the storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. Thank you. And one of the things that you talked about, or actually, we have one of the statements here on the screen from Kelly Mitchell. The pandemic enabled locals to experience many aspects of the tourism products, and they're now better able to tell the brand story. That is correct. And I think a similar thing happened definitely here in Barbados around 2008 when we had that worldwide economic recession, and there were a lot of hotels. Well, we embarked on a local campaign, staycation campaign, where local persons were allowed to visit hotels at reduced rates. So yeah, those are some of the things that different attractions and accommodations had to do in order to sustain themselves. But yes, it also, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying, yeah, it's that's very true. You know, there were opportunities for us to tell stories, but you see, as a Caribbean region, I think there is a gap in terms of these stories for the Caribbean as a region and what makes us stand out and what makes us distinctive in our individual spaces. Because I know Barbados has their own version of a cook-up. Tobago has their cook-up, you know. So how do we create a narrative that supports the distinctive assets of the islands, but yet highlight the uniqueness of the people, and have people part of that story? And it's not being amplified enough for sure. You know, you would see, again, probably there's some elements of the post-colonial, I guess, trauma. So if you're an influencer, you know, in terms of influencer marketing, you tend to see a certain color all the time. But I think with enough push and enough consistency, there can be sufficient representation in the Caribbean stories from Caribbean people.
All right. Thank you so much. Andrew, we have you back. So I know that you have done some recent work on tourism and SDGs. What are some of the ways that we need to rethink tourism in order to meet our sustainable development goals?
Okay, right. So yeah, I'm back and I'm no longer in traffic, so that's good. So yeah, the work we did looked at how tourism investment was being channeled towards the attainment of the SDGs. We looked in particular at three of them. We looked at 8, 12, and 14 in the work we had done. Of course, decent work and economic growth. And we looked, of course, at 14 is life on the water. So the idea is that we were looking at the main sources of tourism investment and how funds were being spent towards achieving the SDGs. So we recognize that there seems to have been a lot of attention on life below water. Far less work was being done towards the attainment of decent work through tourism, and that goes back to the people discourse we were having on the issue of inequalities and those things. So we really weren't channeling a lot of our resources towards the achievement of that through tourism dollars. Our work was on Jamaica though, so I don't know if you know how the Tourism Enhancement Fund works. We collect $20 from every ticket, right? So that's a sizable. When you're getting 4.3 million visitors, I mean, not all of that is stop over. So closer to 3 million people who are contributing $20. You do have some money to go around, and we've been channeling a lot of that largely to some of the green efforts and less so to some of the people efforts. That's what we've done.
Interesting. All right, so I want to get to our last question before we start to entertain some questions from the audience, and this actually comes from a statement that was recently made by the the vice president of the International Air Transport Association for the Americas. He said that the Caribbean is running the risk of pricing themselves out of the global travel and tourism market, where passengers have more choice than ever before. He said, by way of comparison, at a global level, taxes and charges make up approximately 15% of the ticket price, and in the Caribbean, the average is double this at approximately 30% of the ticket price. He said, adding that in some markets, taxes, fees, and charges make up half of the total ticket price. So the president of CDB, for those of you who are tuning in from outside of the Caribbean, that's the Caribbean Development Bank, has recently called for the region to become more innovative in tourism. And I remember actually a couple of years ago, I had a friend who was living in the UK who wanted to come to Barbados to visit me. It was him and his wife. And he decided against it because it was much cheaper to go to Thailand. And so he was getting to ride elephants there. There are no elephants here. There's a beach there. There's beaches here. And the destination on a whole was just a lot cheaper. And so Barbados itself is extremely expensive as a destination. But when you look at the ticket prices in the Caribbean on a whole and the taxes and the amount of, the percentage of the ticket that goes to our taxes, it's becoming really problematic for us to sustain travel to the Caribbean. And so what are some of the things that you think that we need to do? What are some of the ways that we can be more innovative? Because clearly sunstein and sand is not going to cut it forever. Again, we have a lot of the Asian countries, we have the Pacific countries, and some of those places are less expensive destinations. So, Davina, I'm going to start with you.
This is an interesting one. So I actually watched a little bit of the Caribbean, the aviation day that where Gene spoke. I'm calling him Gene as if we went to school together, but
He's your
so
best friend from primary
yeah,
school.
we're friends. It's and I say it's interesting because I think this is something that we've been battling for very many years, right? And successive governments have not, like Andrew said earlier, really had the wherewithal, the what some people would call testicular fortitude to really do anything about it. Because at the end of the day, we unfortunately live in countries that see taxes as a way of getting the income that they need to do whatever they need to do, provide education, healthcare, etc. And I guess maybe airfare seems to be an easy target. I remember during the pandemic we had, and this I guess this may or may not, this bring the connection. But during the pandemic, we were doing the prime minister announced free testing for COVID, and there came a point though, however, that she said, "Well, if you're traveling, you're not going to pay for testing anymore, because if you can travel, you can pay for a test." So I think it's like a similar sentiment. If you can travel, you could pay the taxes. If you can afford to travel, I think that's what people think. If you can afford to travel, then you can afford to also pay the taxes. So I can't say that I have the answer in terms of what exactly we need to do. I know we've gone the route where we've tried some low cost airlines in the past, and those haven't really panned out for, well, that business model for what we do this way. I really can't say that I have the solution. I just know that I'm someone who would really like to see it solved. to some level, because there has to be a way that, I mean, when you look at the European Union, the European Union many years ago agreed on a common currency and all of these different things. And you look at CARICOM and you wonder, well, why can't we get this done? Why can't we get this done? And maybe it's because of what Andrew mentioned earlier. We don't do this servant leadership thing. We hold leadership as this power thing, and all of a sudden, nobody wants to make certain types of decisions, but you kind of want to lord yourself over people. So yeah, I don't know why the EU can get it done in terms of having all of these commonalities with all the different countries, and we can. We seem to have lots of CARICOM meetings, but then some of the outcomes you really have to wonder about. So
can I jump in on that one?
Sure, definitely, because I don't have the full answer.
I'd love to jump. So let me start with the second thing that you said. So we're always going to have this argument, and there's a reason why Federation failed, and there's a reason why CARICOM is weak, and there's a reason why there's really no CARICOM single market and economy. There's a reason why the best thing we had was West Indies cricket and you, right? So to my mind, and I know Sheena may not like what I'm about to say. I think a lot of this may actually be some of those colonial retentions, right? And I'm not saying it from the perspective that it is our mindset necessarily. I'm saying it from a very practical perspective. So the fact that we weren't allowed to develop in the way that we should have developed, like these other guys could in Europe, we didn't have the kind of independence and confidence to develop in the right way. What ended up happening as a result of that is that we became intra-regionally competitive, and where we feel it's kind of like the guy who is not accustomed to something, and the first guy who can get there, let's see who can get there first, and we don't trust the other guy because he's the only one who wants benefit from this. So we've always had a trust issue. And even with the melting pots that we've had, Rowan is my friend, I love everybody from that class, love everybody else who I've met, and I have great friends. Usually when it gets to the point of territorial sovereignty and who should get this and who should get that, it becomes a whole different thing. And I really don't know how we get by that part. But the first part of that, I have a very controversial view on this. I don't think we're an expensive place. I don't think we're rightly priced, to be honest. I think we value more than what we're charging. But I think the issue is that we have not properly extracted the high-end versions of ourselves to be able to command the prices that we want to command. And I think we have sufficient name recognition and brand recognition, most of our destinations in the region, to be able to continue where we are and not necessarily lose market share in the way that Dr. Leon Jean says. But I think it's going to catch up with us if we don't improve the integrity of the product. It's going to catch up with us eventually when we start to reveal our hand and people start to realize that there's a lot of hollow space beneath what we're promoting. It will catch up with us, but I think we just need to get the product. I've said to people, okay, so Jamaica has over 100 internationally recognized attractions. Most Jamaicans haven't been to 8. So everybody knows Dunn's River, Mystic Mountain, Dolphin Cove, and those are the popular ones. What is wrong with the other 90 plus? They're really not at a fabulous standard. So organically, you can enjoy them if you're inclined to have a rustic experience. But we have not helped people to understand what the wow factor is in their product offering, and for them to emphasize that sufficiently so they can attract the right prices. Something that plagued me and bothered that I was running that agency was I could not get craft vendors to understand that we needed to move away from all the craft items being made in China, right? And that the guys who were making, the artisans who were making really fabulous pieces, which would have been at a slightly higher price point, were not getting any kind of pride of place in our craft markets. Because again, we haven't accepted that what we have is world class. Some of it just needs some Some of it just needs some upgrading. I'll end on this point. If we go back to the argument, and if we properly develop the human capital, here's what will happen. We're going to have individuals who are going to be so stellar in the service they offer, who are going to be the best storytellers, who will craft a narrative that's going to ensure that we are the most raw and authentic version of ourselves that the new experiential traveler wants, that we won't have the kinds of debates that we're having today. We had some guys who were harassers in a place called Falmouth. They were chasing people down the alleys. And then the police were chasing them down the alleys because we wanted them to stop. And I said, let's rethink this thing. We pulled the 10 most problematic ones and we put them through training. We gave them what I call hygiene upgrades, right? So we did dental work on them. We made them look good. We gave them uniforms. We gave them a graduation. We brought in their families and made their families feel proud. And these guys were the biggest ambassadors. Harassment moved to 0 in that space. Of course, these programs tend to fall apart after a while. We don't sustain many things in the Caribbean, but I'm making the point that we just have to know who we are. And I think if we know who we are and we develop what is important about us, then we'll find the right price point. And then we can stop having debates about whether, because nothing's wrong if we attract a luxury market. What's wrong with it? So that's kind of where my thinking is. I want to expand how the Caribbean views itself and what we're able to achieve.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you there at all. I mean, there is a certain level of self-actualization we have to come into as Caribbean people. But we will get there slowly but surely. And again, one of the fallouts, I guess, of tourism and how it started in the Caribbean is, that core and periphery. We have to depend on the colonial powers to provide the supply of tourists that we need to sustain our economic systems. And it just going back to the whole concept of developing airlift, it really is a numbers game. And if we don't have the quality of products to command a certain level of demand, it just will not be sustained. It will not be profitable. And I'm talking about demand over a period of time, because we are susceptible to seasonality, and that's something we also have to consider. So it's a conversation that can take us down a very deep rabbit hole. But yes, in the Caribbean, we definitely need to look at who we are as a people and come into ourselves and believe in what we have to offer and value what we have to offer. I have this thing where everybody's pushing support local, but sometimes it's just a quick fix for just buying something that can sometimes be of a subpar quality. And, that's where we're at.
All right, thank you guys. That was actually really good contribution. I especially like the part where you talked about us really recognizing what we have to offer, appreciating what we have to offer, because if we don't appreciate what we have, then we can't really expect people to appreciate what we're offering. And I think that is something that I keep hearing amongst Caribbean people, where we talk a lot about ourselves and not necessarily in a positive light. So we don't talk about our persons what other citizens in our countries in a positive light. But then also, there's this competition, like Andrew said, where we think that we're better than people from other islands, and this island is a small island, and these people backward. And
I feel like I'm being targeted as a Trimbignonian, but that's all right.
Well, I mean, there are some other people on the panel who have that same problem, but those larger countries, but I'm not going to say anything. So yeah. But Barbados is accused of it as well. I know my mother always talks, because my mother is not from Barbados, and she always laughs at the fact that Bajans call other people small islanders, because mommy is like, Barbados is so small. And where she's from, my mother's from Dominica, and Dominica is larger than Barbados. I mean, the population is less, but she's like, why are we calling people small islanders? And we're so small. So there's all, there's all this. And then when when you look at us in comparison to persons in other parts of the world, I remember when I was living in New Zealand, it really stood out to me how small we really are, because I was telling people that there are like 280,000 people in Barbados, and they thought it was hilarious because in their city alone, there's 1 million people. So they're like, what's going on? So if we're supposed to remain or become competitive, we really need to join forces. And instead of competing against each other, recognize that we really need to value ourselves, value each other. All right, so I want to go to the comment section. There's actually a very interesting question that I wanted to touch on. It's by Simone Harris.
I know that name. That sounds like a CHTMI.
Really, Simone?
I don't know.
Okay.
Name sounds familiar.
Okay. Simone, you can let us know if you're from CHTM. So Simone says, according to Open for Business study, the economic case for LGBT plus inclusion in the Caribbean 2021, tourism in the Caribbean is diminished by anti-LGBT plus laws and stigma at a cost of between USD 423 million and up to USD 689 million, or 0.57% to 0.93% of regional GDP. With the recent changes to the LGBT legislation in a number of Caribbean islands, including TNT and Barbados, how can data like this help us to rethink tourism? Any thoughts?
Oh no, the depth of that question makes me know which Simone Harris that is. Yes. But,
okay,
but
so you know who that is.
I let Barbados and Trinidad and Tobago answer.
Okay, Barbados and Trinidad don't have a response.
Well, data in general is always very helpful to guide us in decision making. So, we just need to make sure that it's, the numbers that we get from it is factual and that we use it in the right way. So, she talked about the fact that the cost is between 423 to 689 million, or 0.57 to 0.93 percent of regional GDP, sorry, in terms of the economic case. So we can look at this and see whether, how much of this market we actually want to engage more of. If this is, what the impact is for us, then we have to really assess, is it beneficial to pursue? These are the questions that we need to ask, So, and it looks like it is, right? So we yeah, like I said, data in general is helpful for decision making. So rethinking tourism using data, I think, is really a good way to go, because oftentimes we do not use a lot of data in the work that we currently do. And so we tend not to present factual things. We tend to speak in generalizations and maybe pull things from midair. So it's definitely important to use data. And if data like this shows us that really these laws are unhelpful, then we can, ensure that we do something about it.
What I would add to that, because we had certain movements and laws in Trinidad and Tobago, yes, but we have to look at data not just from an economic point of view, but also a social impact point of view. So the social sentiment is also something to look at, and the residents' appetite for a certain type of experience or providing a certain type of experience. And that's what we were alluding to during the entire discourse, putting the people at the forefront. I think Trinidad is a little different to Tobago in this regard. I will say that. But there have been, certain aspects, certain pockets of communities where you're seeing changes. And I believe over time, there will be a certain, I guess, approach to dealing with what we call pink tourism or LGBTQ or whichever one they prefer to be called. But I think what needs to go hand in hand with it is just understanding the facets of the tourism offerings and how it can be created to suit a certain type of clientele. Because it can be a situation where they have certain spaces that they feel safe and comfortable going into, because changing an entire legislation takes quite a time. Based on what I know, it's just anti-buggering that has been looked at, but not entirely the whole LGBT suite of laws. So it's and then we have to consider the history of the Caribbean and where we at, as I said, the social impacts and looking at the social sentiments towards certain types of offerings, because that's something we do as well. Even just for ecotourism, weddings, wellness, whatever you want to, we want to see what the residents' perception is on that certain type of experience.
Okay. I agree with actually what both of you said. I think it needs to be informed by the data, but it also needs to, but the data can't only be economic. You actually have to also look at data in a holistic sense and see how the residents of the country feel about these things, like how we approach anything else. I think one of the things we do not want to do for any of our tourists is to bring them into a space that is not accepting or that is not safe for them. And so there's a whole lot that needs to be done in order to make sure that those things are put in place. Before we say wholesale, okay, the law has changed, and so therefore there's a lot that happens before things like this can happen, so
Yeah,
to
there are a
speak.
lot of steps, definitely.
Yeah. And like I said, even if when we look at something like the mask mandates, and I don't want to make light, so please don't misunderstand the comparison. It's just a way of, a simple way of looking at how the process works. In Barbados, the mask mandates ended last week, except for certain places. But even though persons really wanted to get rid of the mask, people are still wearing their masks. The country has not gone straight into not wearing masks because, the legislation or whatever has changed to allow persons to not have to wear them anymore. There's a process that is involved. And I think that all of these things need to be considered. All right. Any more comments that we want to highlight here? I think that's pretty much it. I think we've covered most everything. Thank you so much to everybody. Okay, Jermaine, what is the panel's view on the contribution of the tourism industry to the economy versus the resources required to sustain the industry? Is it worth it for small developing economies to proffer sizable investment levels? The sizable investment levels we do for the minimal returns. And this is actually going to be our last question because we're going up on 2 hours.
Yes.
We're going up on 2 hours.
Yeah. So, this is the final question. Let me take a shot at this. Yes. I think so. My view on it is that the question probably ought not to be whether we should be investing heavily, but we should be questioning the return on investment. So there are things that you do in a process to ensure that the returns on your investment are solid. So again, what are you investing in? Go back to the question I was asked about how we were channeling our resources in terms of achievement of the SDGs. How are we channeling resources? But that I can't think of any better return on our investment than a return that helps us to meet one of those 17 goals. I mean, to my mind, these are created to ensure that there is dignity through decent work. These are created to ensure that there is consideration for proper conservative and responsible activities. These are things that are intended to address the inequalities we spoke about. These are things, and I think if we look at it in that way, then tourism doesn't just benefit tourism. The returns then become much broader, and we start to see what the very early researchers would have spoken about when Abraham Pisam would have been trying to figure out how to get tourism to really have the impact it can. And when we saw what we're talking about, life cycles and what it meant, and we saw all of these early theorists, Jafar and all of them, trying to figure out how do we ensure that tourism does what it is intended to do. And the way to do that is to make sure that it is kind of tentacular in its approach. So the tentacles reach all over, and that people in communities, at least the communities that are adjacent to tourism spaces, feel real impacts in terms of their social conditions, feel real impacts in terms of how their environments are being treated, feel real impact in terms of how they feel about themselves. I tell people all the time, prosperity is a feeling. I leave it there.
All right. Thank you so much. So yes, thanks to all our panelists for coming on, spending this really long time having this conversation with us. I would say it's been a really interesting conversation. Thanks so much to our audience who stayed with us and asked questions. Thanks especially to persons from CHDM who came on to support us. Thank you to our guests from across the region and across the world. We have people from Barbados, St. Lucia, Jamaica, Papua New Guinea, New Zealand. So thank you so much. And until next time.
Thank you, ladies, for the wonderful company on the drive home. I've been in traffic for 3 hours, right? And out of that,
wow.
You kept me through.
That is crazy. That is crazy. So yes, so I mean, thank you. I look forward to seeing you next month. So we're usually the last Thursday of every month, but if you want to be sure, you can always what was I going to say? Sorry. You can always subscribe on my YouTube channel, which is Sanderson-Smith School of Business. You can also connect with me on Facebook at Sanderson-Smith School of Business, or you can link with me on LinkedIn at Roanne Smith. And that's it. See you next month. Thank you so much and have a wonderful evening. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.